last week, the executive director of American Compass, Oren Cass, was on Rising discussing his cost of thriving index and why the establishment won't admit that workers today are getting screwed. The Wall Street Journal did not respond well to Oren describing America's economic challenges.
So, using clips from his interview on my podcast, The Realignment, and his Rising appearance, the Wall Street Journal edited together what is basically a negative ad against Oren. The video is accompanied by a column from Bill McGurn. Oren responded to the column in a Medium post titled The Wall Street Journal Goes Negative, and he joins us now to expand on his piece. Oren, I guess this is a strange turn of events here.
I've always wanted an attack ad against
the whole thing where they circled your face and had ominous music and B-roll and all that. I mean, what is going on here, Oren? Why are they so mad at you? What did you do?
Yeah, I don't know if they're mad at me. I think they're not accustomed to this kind of challenge from. It's certainly not from the left. In a sense, it's from the right, but it's almost from a different dimension, which I know is something you guys talk about a lot. It's asking, well, wait a minute, what is conservatism? And if we want to be conservative about things like the economy and markets, what should we actually believe? And people who know exactly what they believe and have always believed it and have built institutions around saying exactly that, I think, struggle sometimes to cope with those debates. Hopefully we'll have those debates ultimately.
Well, I mean, I'm a bit of an outside observer to all of this, so it makes even less sense to me. But it seems to me like part of what you're talking about is recentering family and community and affirmatively valuing those things above not just like GDP growth and the markets in general. That seems like a very conservative principle.
Yeah, you think so.
I think that's right. And I think Bill McGurn, who wrote the column, is a really interesting example of this, because I think, he's actually an incredibly thoughtful commentator on a lot of these social issues. But, my read of his work is that he sees a very sort of bright line between wanting to talk about the importance of family and community. And he acknowledges even in the column, there is a lot more to life than economic growth. But cabining that completely, and then if we actually want to talk about public policy or economics, then that just kind of goes out the window, and we're just going to talk about free markets always solving everything.
And that's what the main criticism, Oren, one thing I want you to be able to respond to, what has triggered people probably more than anything was you called out, quote, free market fundamentalists. And a lot of people, including a guy who literally writes a column about laissez-faire economics, claims he's not a free market fundamentalist. He said, where are these free market fundamentalists that you speak of? What did you mean whenever you said that term?
Well, to some extent, I'm sympathetic to people's objections. No one likes having a label put on them. And I would be open to being told there's another term to be used. Some people use libertarian. I don't think libertarian is quite the right one here. Libertarian, I think, is a much more kind of philosophical argument, not as much an economic policy idea. And at least what I mean when I say market fundamentalism, and I'm sure I've slipped up on this, honestly, I try not even to call a person a market fundamentalist. It's the idea of the fundamentalism. And it's very funny, if you watch the attack ad, he says, I'm doing name calling. And then his only example of name calling is me saying, I don't think market fundamentalism is a good idea.
Yes, right. So he's actually acknowledging he's a market fundamentalist.
Well, there's just, they didn't even have a clip of me calling anyone a name. Sure. But, market fundamentalism in my mind comes down to this idea that we are going to invest faith in free markets, not just to do the many things that markets do. I think I'm an awfully pro-market person. I think markets do wonderful things. They're the correct way to organize our economy. But we also have to understand what they do and what they don't do. And in my view, market fundamentalism is when you lose that distinction and just say, one, the market is always going to produce a good solution. And two, and this is where I think McGurn goes a little bit, although I'd love to have a debate with him about it.
We would love to host that debate, by the way.
Yeah, by the way.
Open invite.
Apparently he lives nearby, so hey, he's welcome.
I would love to make that. And there's one of the things he says. He says, this is a debate we should have. So
let's
go.
I certainly agree with that. But the place where I think the market fundamentalism goes is to say, even if the market is not producing the good outcome, it is still the correct answer.
Yes.
And that's where I think we have to say, well, wait a minute. Markets are a mechanism that we love and we want to use, but we like them because they're an effective mechanism. And if they're not being an effective mechanism, we should say that. And it is, in fact, pro-market to say that and say we want to figure out what to do about it so that markets are working and are serving people and providing the function we want.
There you go.
I think the whole idea, too, of like free market, like that's a attainable or certain thing is also a little bit of a fantasy. Like all these markets are governed by government regulation, by social custom, by the agreements that we have with countries around the world. I mean, the idea that there is this perfect free market that we have ever had or should strive towards is, to me, a little bit delusional as well.
Yeah, well, that's a really nice point. And I think what folks who call for freer markets would say is that's right, and that's why the response is to get government out of the way, and then things would work better. And there are places where that's the case. There are places where I think, less regulation would be incredibly useful. I think where again we have more of a conflict is in the question of whether public policy also does have a constructive role to play.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And that's where I think, again, what I would call the more fundamentalist.
This isn't a free market when Amazon has such control, a monopoly control over so many sectors, or Apple or Google or Amazon, whatever industry you want to talk about. There's been this massive consolidation. Like, is that a free market? Is that good for workers? Is that good for America?
Yeah, go ahead, Oren. I mean, it's funny because I remember I did that monologue here, some people might remember, against Crenshaw conservatisve, and it borrowed much from what you talked about, which is that you still have people out there being like, if people don't like their employer, they have they have equal freedom in the marketplace that the employer does in order to go work for somebody else. And you're like, we figured this out 100 years ago. Like 100 years ago, we came up with the idea that like, no, actually, like workers don't have the same amount of power in the employer-employee relationship, ergo, like somebody steps in order to protect its populace. It seems almost like there's been a reversion on the American right from recognitions of truth that we had so long ago.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's a huge theme for American Compass, is that, we're not here to kind of introduce something new and different and radical that we are then going to claim is conservative.
Yeah.
We think if you go back and look at the American tradition generally, from the American founders through the economic policies that made us the greatest, most powerful, and ultimately, such a free and prosperous market. If you look at what conservative thinkers historically said, if you look at what economists historically said, everyone understands these things that you guys are raising, that there are imbalances in power between labor and capital that we need to attend to, that there are situations where competition does not work well, that, as Crystal, you said, the market isn't this just thing in the state of nature. The market is something that public policy ultimately has to set the conditions for. And so rather than have this debate about, well, just more government or less government, there are places where we might need more government or less government. But the more interesting question in my mind is, what are we looking for markets to deliver? Where are they doing that or not? And where they're not, what are the conditions that we've set up that aren't facilitating the right outcomes, especially if in the past we can see they facilitated better outcomes.
Right.
And so which conditions should we be looking at and asking, maybe we could do something better?
Right.
Let me ask you a specific point on that, because one of the most effective tools for power for labor throughout history has been unions, right? This has been one of the ways that when workers band together, of course, they have more power vis-a-vis their employer and their companies. What is your view on that, and what is sort of the new right view on unions?
So I think unions is a perfect example of what we're talking about, which is that the idea of organized labor, the idea that workers should be able to come together to bargain collectively with an employer, that should be a fundamentally conservative idea. Right. It's conservative because it's people in their private capacity working together,
right,
forming arrangements with the people they're working with without government having to make the rule. Not a big government coming in and It's an institution of civil society that provides all sorts of other really valuable support outside of the bargaining arrangement. And yet the right of center view has become, unions are bad, let's kill them.
All unions.
All unions. Yeah. And that's a key point, because we have another problem, which is unions, as they are operating in this country, don't work especially well. A lot of workers aren't even happy with them. In a lot of cases, they ultimately do more harm than good, I would say. And so we're stuck with this left of center view that mostly for political reasons has to say, let's get more people into existing unions. And a right of center view that has just become, well, let's just hope all unions everywhere die.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is why I say we literally need to bring a conservative conception of economics back into this discussion, because it's neither of those things.
Right.
It would be saying, let's have organized
argue about
labor.
the formation of a union, how they should operate and everything, when you don't believe unions should exist in the first place.
Right.
Or you,
And by
or
the
you
way-
believe that, or you believe that they can't change.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, if you go to a lot of states that have a strong labor history, you will find lots of Republicans who are pro-labor. So this is, the national conversation is very
40%
different.
of people in a union
than the
voted for
state
Donald Trump in
conversation.
2016.
Absolutely.
And yet, you have the same party, which is just vilifying them against them in public policy. And that's part of what, Oren, you're trying to change. Just tell everybody where they can visit American Compass.
Sure, we're on the web at americancompass.org.
On the web.
The World Wide Web.
Is that the intertubes? And Twitter, AmerCompass.
All right, there you go. All right, thank
Thanks,
you, Oren, for
Oren.
stopping by as always. Great friend of the show.
Hang in there, Oren.
Yeah,
Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Next on Rising, journalist Blake Zeff. He tells us what segment of voters Democrats should not take for granted. That's next.